Stories, Philippines, podcast.
This episode contains descriptions of deep psychological distress and themes of eternal guilt that some listeners may find intensely disturbing. Listener care is strongly advised. The chill in the air of the detention center waiting room, a manufactured cold that cuts through the tropical heat of a late afternoon in Manila, does not compare to the ice that forms around a person's soul when they know they have done the unforgivable. Is there a crime so profound, an act so devastating that the universe itself refuses to grant you peace? Can you ever truly be free when the memory of a single terrible moment is a shard of glass lodged forever beneath your heart? What happens when your punishment is not the years behind bars, but the inescapable, echoing silence of a life you destroyed? I am Paul, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast. The scent of stale disinfectant and old paper clung to the walls of the Provincial Capital Records Office in Bataan. It was 1988 and Leonila Nila Cruz de Masalang was 23 years old, her hands trembling as they sorted through the brittle pages of old court transcripts. Nila was a newly minted legal researcher assigned to a cold case review, a matter of bureaucratic tidiness that few expected to yield anything but dust. The file she was working on was titled The Republic versus Ernesto San Gabriel, Case number 1968-4, Manslaughter. The paper smelled of the past, a bitter, vinegary perfume that seemed to hold the weight of all the sorrow it recorded. Ernesto San Gabriel's crime had happened 2 decades earlier in the seaside town of Maraveles, Bataan. It was a dark, hushed-up affair in the late 1960s. Ernesto, then a young man barely out of his teenage years, had been driving late one night, drunk and reckless, when his jeepney slammed into a small family crossing the unlit provincial road. The details were simple, stark, and brutal. 2 people dead. The husband, Rodolfo Rudy Santos, a simple fisherman, and their unborn child, lost when his wife, Carmelita Miniramo Santos, an ordinary school teacher, was rushed to the hospital only to lose the baby before succumbing to her own injuries days later. Ernesto served his time a comparatively short sentence due to family connections and the general legal environment of the era. He was released in the early 1970s. The historical context of the Philippines in the late 60s was a turbulent one, a precursor to the coming years of martial law. Authority was often exercised unevenly, and justice for the poor was frequently an abstract concept, a dream dissolved by influence and wealth. For a well-connected family like Ernesto's, their power could temper the full force of the law, a global connection to the age-old reality that different people inhabit different justice systems. This inequality fed a deep cultural resentment among the common folk. The local belief that had latched onto the case, what they whispered in Maraveles, was the concept of gaba. Gaba is a distinctly Filipino concept, particularly strong among the Visayan people. Although its shadow stretches across the entire archipelago, it is not merely a curse or divine retribution, though it shares traits with both. Gaba is an imminent cosmic consequence, a negative karma that is self-executing. It is the universe correcting a grave moral imbalance. You do wrong, and the world itself will find a way to punish you, often in an unforeseen or protracted manner. It is said that Gaba does not announce its arrival. It is a slow, relentless erosion of fortune and peace. The townsfolk believed Ernesto was struck by Gaba. They said his light sentence was only the beginning of a lifelong, subtle punishment, a torment far worse than any jail cell. For 20 years after his release, Ernesto San Gabriel, now a man in his 40s, never knew a day of true peace. Mila's research didn't just cover the legal records, it led her to local reports, police blotters, and eventually the people of Maraveles. She learned that Ernesto's life had become a slow-motion disaster. His family's fortunes dwindled inexplicably. His once lucrative businesses crumbled. He married 3 times, each marriage ending in tragedy or bitter separation. He was plagued by a string of bizarre, non-fatal accidents and a nameless creeping sickness that doctors could not diagnose. It was, to the people of Maraveles, a textbook case of gabo. The dark history behind this belief in Gaba reveals a kind of psychological defense mechanism for the oppressed. In an era where earthly justice failed, the community took comfort in the knowledge of a higher, more patient system. It's an international parallel to the Western idea of nemesis, or the deeper moral causality of Hindu karma. But Gaba is more personal, more immediate, yet often manifesting through the mundane decay of life. It's a haunting that does not need a ghost. The ghost is the memory of the crime, the self-inflicted torment. One story Nila uncovered chilled her to the bone. Ernesto had bought a grand, old house overlooking the cove a few years after his release. He thought a change of scenery would help, but his life there became unbearable. Every night, his family members and eventually he himself would hear the sound of a small, wooden fishing boat scraping against the shore, followed by the faint, muffled sound of a woman crying. The house was far from the water and there was no beach nearby, only a rocky cliff. It was the phantom echo of Rudy's fishing boat and Meli's sorrow. This brings us to the modern paranormal investigation findings. Nila found a mention of this house in a local enthusiast report from the late 1970s, a rudimentary attempt at a spirit investigation. The report, scrawled on notebook paper, spoke of electromagnetic field anomalies, spiking wildly inside Ernesto's bedroom, correlating exactly with the recorded time of the phantom sound's midnight. A local spiritualist consulted at the time claimed the house was not haunted by a traditional ghost, but by the residue of a profound injustice, a spiritual equivalent of the crime scene's psychic trauma, a permanent stain on the environment. The grief was so intense, the injustice so stark, that it had imprinted itself on the very stone and air. For those interested in the scientific and psychological perspectives, this is where the tale truly darkens. Ernesto San Gabriel was not just haunted by a spirit, he was tormented by his own guilt. The phantom sounds, the creeping sickness, the ruin of his life, all of it could be filtered through the lens of psychology. Post-traumatic stress disorder, decades of chronic, unbearable guilt leading to psychosomatic illness. His actions created a toxic internal environment and his subconscious projected his victim's suffering onto his reality. He was his own most relentless punisher. The belief in Gaba provided a cultural script for this self-destruction. He didn't just believe he was cursed, he knew he deserved to be. The punishment was not external, it was the slow, agonizing realization that he was an unforgivable person. If you have a story, a deep memory of a haunting, or an unexplained turn of fortune that feels like a consequence of a past wrong, do not keep it hidden in the shadows. We are collecting tales from across the islands that speak to the heart of our folklore and history. Send us your first-hand accounts to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com, and let your truth be heard. Theological insights offer a different shade to this darkness. In the predominantly Catholic Philippines, the idea of divine forgiveness is central. Confession and repentance offer absolution. Yet, Gaba coexists with this faith, suggesting that even if God forgives you, the earthly cosmic ledger may still demand a payment. It is the concept of eternal consequence, a parallel to the idea of purgatory, only one experienced entirely on earth. In this life, Ernesto's punishment was not the denial of heaven, but the creation of his own personal hell here and now. The only true absolution in the Gaba framework is restitution and moral balance. And for a life taken, what restitution is possible? Mila, driven by a growing morbid fascination, sought out Carmelita Ramos Santos' only surviving relative, a cousin named Remedios Remy Santos Manguera. Remy lived in a small, weathered, clapboard house on the outskirts of Maraveles, a place that smelled of salt and dried fish, the very essence of the fishing life that Rudy Santos had lost. The house had a panoramic but sad view of the cove, a crescent of dark sand and restless water. Remy was an older woman now, her face a map of sun and quiet sorrow. She didn't speak of ghosts, but of a quiet certainty. Ernesto does not need a spirit to remind him, she told Nila, her voice raspy like dry leaves. He walks on the ground that remembers my cousin. The air he breathes holds the last cry of the unborn child. Remy mentioned a small local sanctuary Rudy had built near his old fishing spot, a humble shrine to a local saint where he would pray for a good catch. After the tragedy, the shrine was neglected, but the local elders had warned Ernesto against removing it when he expanded his property. They said doing so would be an act of profound disrespect, an offense that would draw a swift gaba. Ernesto, in his desperate attempt to erase the past and create a new beginning, had bulldozed the shrine in the early 1970s to make way for a concrete fence. That, the elders had declared, was the trigger. He had not only transgressed against man, but against the sacred, a line that even the most powerful could not cross without consequence. The house Ernesto built on the ruins of the shrine soon developed deep, inexplicable cracks in the foundation. The walls were always cold to the touch, and a faint, mildew-like odor of salt water seemed to cling to every room, regardless of cleaning. It was a detailed geographic description that spoke not of an architectural flaw, but of a spiritual infection. The land itself had refused him. Nila decided to trace Ernesto's final years. She learned his second son, named Julian Junsan Gabriel, a cheerful, promising student in his early 20s, was tragically killed in a highway accident in the 1980s. The cause of the accident? A drunken, reckless driver. The irony was a punch to the gut. The punishment of Gaba is often said to follow the bloodline. The idea of collective consequence on the family, a bitter form of justice for the community. Ernesto's son paid the ultimate price for his father's unforgivable sin. The self-inflicted torment of the father was now shared, magnified, and cemented. The story of eternal guilt is universal. From the ancient Greek Furies who relentlessly pursued those who committed patricide, to the concept of the doppelganger in German folklore, an ominous double who embodies the dark side of a person's soul and heralds doom, humanity has always wrestled with the inescapable consequence of moral failure. Our Filipino Gaba simply localizes that terror in the slow, agonizing spiral of a family's fortunes, a relentless haunting by the memory of one's own crime, not necessarily by a malicious spirit. It's the constant, sickening realization that the past is never truly past. We often provide a wealth of context and deeper dives into the stories we cover to get exclusive bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes research notes, and to directly support the production of stories like this, you should seriously consider accessing our exclusive content on Patreon. Your support helps us keep the microphones running and the research lights burning. The most recent documented event Nila found was a police report from 1988, the very year she was researching the case. Ernesto San Gabriel, now utterly broken, was found wandering the docks of Maraveles at 3 in the morning, soaking wet, his eyes wide and vacant. He was repeating only one word, over and over again, like a mantra of madness: unforgivable. He had apparently attempted to walk into the sea, unable to bear the weight of his torment any longer. He was institutionalized soon after. Nila visited him in the mental health facility outside of Manila. He was housed in a clean, quiet ward, his physical health surprisingly intact, but his mind a shattered landscape of regret. His attending physician, Dr. Celeste Celi Ramos, spoke to Nila not as a legal researcher, but as a person searching for meaning in the face of immense self-inflicted suffering. He does not talk about the night of the accident, Dr. Ramos explained, adjusting her glasses. He talks about a debt, an infinite one. He describes a constant, cold presence behind him, like a hand on his shoulder that no one else can see. He believes that every small misfortune, every cough, every missed meal is a direct payment for the lives he took. His crime was not only in the act itself, but in the belief that he could ever outrun its consequence. This is the very essence of the Filipino concept of Gaba the hunting, by one's own crime. It is not an external demon. It is the corrosive power of guilt, turning a person into their own eternal prison warden. The most relentless punishment is the self-inflicted torment, the Gaba that consumes the soul from within. We are constantly unearthing fascinating connections between Filipino beliefs and global mythology. If you want to expand your knowledge of the strange and wonderful tapestry of our culture, make sure you follow us on social media for daily folklore facts that will make you look at the world a little differently. Ernesto San Gabriel's story serves as a mirror. He was not a monster, but a young man who made a catastrophic mistake and then spent the rest of his life being hunted by that single terrible decision. He was consumed by the idea that his sin was unforgivable, not by the courts, not by the church, but by the relentless moral causality of the universe itself. His release from prison was merely the transfer from a physical cell to a psychological one, infinitely more cruel and inescapable. His silence and his madness were the final price of his death, the final act of Gaba. This episode's thematic link of eternal guilt and haunting by one's own crime strongly resonates with the film The Unforgivable, a psychological thriller from 2021 starring Sandra Bullock. The film centers on Ruth Slater, a woman released after serving 20 years for a violent crime, who re-enters a society that is determined to deny her any semblance of forgiveness or a second chance. The plot is structured around her bleak, almost suffocating struggle to rebuild a life, and more urgently to find the estranged younger sister she was forced to leave behind. What makes the film a compelling companion to the idea of Gabo is the palpable sense of relentless, self-inflicted torment. Ruth is not a free woman when she leaves prison. She is simply an inmate in a larger societal jail, perpetually condemned as a cop killer. The world around her, particularly the family of the murdered sheriff, embodies the external forces of judgment and retribution, which in a way is society acting as the conduit of Gabo. However, the deepest resonance is internal. Sandra Bullock's performance, raw and internalized, captures the essence of a soul weighed down by an unpayable debt. Even when offered moments of kindness or opportunity, Ruth is fundamentally incapable of accepting them. Her emotional landscape is one of chronic self-punishment. She carries the guilt like a second skin, a constant, abrasive reminder of the past. The self-inflicted nature of her torment, the inability to forgive herself, is the true Gaba. The twist in the final act, which reveals a profound act of sacrifice, only magnifies this internal torment, showing that the true unforgivable sin was not the act of violence itself, but the 20 years of silent self-condemnation and separation from the one person she sought to protect. The movie is a stark, sometimes bleak examination of how guilt, in the absence of societal or personal forgiveness, becomes an endless cycle of self-destruction, an inescapable debt to the universe. In the end, as the sun sets over the Mariveles Cove, the light catching the broken windows of the old San Gabriel house, the question remains: was Ernesto San Gabriel truly haunted by the spirits of Rudy and Melly? Or was he consumed by the relentless, unforgiving force of his own mind? A mind that knew, deep down, that there are some things for which there is no earthly or even heavenly pardon. Was the punishment the crime? Or was the crime the lifelong torment of living with the unforgivable sin? Remember to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with a friend who appreciates a good ghost story with a dark history. Support the stories we tell and the research we do by finding all the ways you can contribute financially in the show notes. Join us next time as we delve into the shadows of the past and explore another story from the heart of the Philippines.